guess you could say I've always loved old things, musty books more than anything. So when I landed a job at the Altorn Book Archive, it was damn near a wish fulfillment. Quiet, dusty aisles of time-worn pages, each whispering stories as I shelved and sorted. I remember walking through those halls on my first day, fingers lightly brushing the spines, feeling like I had wandered into a sacred crypt of knowledge. The building itself was this imposing stone structure, like a stately home squished under the weight of its own history. That first day, the stale air of the archive hit me, a mix of old leather, wood polish, and something faintly metallic I couldn't quite place. Inside, dim lights cast long shadows, making the narrow hallways between shelves feel like endless tunnels in a labyrinth. Keith, my supervisor, was a thin, wiry guy with glasses always slipping down his nose. First thing he did was hand me a set of keys that jingled like a medieval jailer's, and a ring-bound manual so worn it could have been an exhibit itself. "You're going to find things are a bit peculiar around here," he said, cracking a halved smile that didn't quite meet his eyes. "Why's that?" I asked, flipping through the dusty manual. "Some of the books, they're a bit odd, tends to affect the building. You'll get used to it." I should have asked what he meant, but just then, a sharp whiff of that metallic scent stopped me. It was stronger in a particular aisle, and it distracted me enough that I let it slide. The job was easy enough at first. Sort, catalog, help the odd researcher, and ignore the peculiarities, like how you could hear the faint rustle of pages even in the empty sections, or how some books felt inexplicably warm to the touch. But yesterday, something new began. I found a note tucked into my locker. Not just any note, a set of rules, scribbled in urgent, shaky handwriting. It could have been a prank by one of the university kids who sometimes came in for research, but reading it, a chilling sensation crawled along my spine. I thought I'd feel silly obeying them, but something about the archive's dim corners made me wary enough to not dismiss it outright. 1. Never move a book from the S section after dark. 2. If you hear a ticking sound, close your eyes and count to 10. Do not open them until silence returns. 3. Never, under any circumstances, follow the cat. Funny, right? The thing is, the archive doesn't have a cat, or at least that's what I thought. I decided to ask Keith about the note next morning, but when I arrived, the usual dim morning light was overshadowed by a thick fog pressing against the windows, giving the archive a submerged, otherworldly feel. Keith wasn't at his desk, and when I called out for him, my voice sounded muffled, swallowed by the fog. "Keith," my footsteps echoed off the stone as I ventured further into the aisles, the air growing colder with each step. That's when I heard it, the soft padding of feet and a faint purring sound. Turning the corner, I strained through the dense fog, and there it was. A shadowy feline form, its eyes glimmering faintly as it stared at me from the end of the row. I froze, remembering the rule, do not follow the cat. It took a step towards me, a soft, inviting meow echoing through the aisle. Heart hammering, I took a step back, and then another until I bumped into a shelf, a shower of dust trickling down. The cat paused, gave another plaintive meow, and turned, walking away into the thickening fog between the shelves. I wanted to follow it to see where it went, but instead, I turned and nearly ran back to the front desk. Keith was there now, looking as if he'd been there all morning. "Where were you?" I asked, trying to catch my breath. "Right here," he said. I was a bit too focused on his paperwork. But the thing is, I don't think I imagined the cat. Or the rules which are now lying on my desk, the scribbled letters seeming to pulse with urgency. And that smell, that metallic scent, it's gotten stronger, clinging to the back of my throat. I think tonight, I'm going to break one of the rules. Maybe then I'll understand. But that decision, it feels as heavy as the darkness that fills the archive when the lights dim, and the last of the daylight fades outside the fogged windows. The rule I chose to break was the simplest yet most forbidden. Do not, under any circumstances, remain in the archives after midnight. The old clock in the hall reverberated, marking the late hour with its melancholic tone. As the last chime fell silent, a weighty stillness enveloped the room. The air grew thick, the sort of thick where you reckon you could slice through it with a blunt knife. The musty scent of old paper seemed to intensify, mingling now with something faintly metallic, iron-like. I swallowed, my throat dry. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to break my own rebellion and flee back to the safety of my small, cluttered apartment above ground. Yet, see, curiosity, that most fatal of flaws, rooted me to the spot. I started to walk the aisles, my flashlight's beam trembling slightly as my hand shook. The light fell upon row after anxious row of ancient filing cabinets and shelves burdened with dust-covered books, their spines etched in gold leaf that no longer glimmered but seemed to absorb light, hungering for something lost to time. That's when I heard it, a soft scratching sound like the skitter of mouse feet, but somehow heavier, more deliberate. It came from the far end of the archive, from a section cordoned off with velvet rope, as if the knowledge it held was too perilous to be perused. The rule was clear: do not cross the rope, do not even let your shadow fall over it. But hadn't I already shattered one rule? What harm could another do? Stepping over the rope felt like plunging into freezing water. My breath caught in my chest, heart hammering, as if I'd truly submerged myself into some dark, unseen ocean. The scratching grew louder, urgent, and then it ceased abruptly, replaced by a low, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled over the concrete floor. Reaching the corner, I shone the light forward and gasped. The shelf at the very end was slightly ajar, revealing a narrow gap behind it. The air here was icier, carrying a stench of damp and decay. A part of me, a very sensible part, wanted to turn back, to put everything right and seal the shelf. Yet the other part, the part driven by the insatiable human desire to know, to discover, nudged me forward. The gap was just wide enough for someone to slip through sidewise. As I squeezed into the space, the cold seemed to seep into my bones, the damp clinging to my hair and skin. Emerging on the other side, I found myself in a smaller room, one not listed on any of our maps or databases. It smelled ancient, the air stale and untouched, as if I were the first living soul to breathe it in centuries. On a table in the center lay a single book, its cover a patchwork of human skin, stitched haphazardly. My stomach churned. The palpable wrongness of the room intensified, each of my senses rebelling. I should have left then, but again, I did not. I approached the book, each step heavy, fighting against the dread that screamed within me to stop. The moment my fingers touched the grotesque cover, the room shifted. The walls groaned, and in the suffocating dark, whispers filled the air, circling around me like vultures around carrion. I wanted to flee, to scream, but my body wouldn't obey. The pages flipped open as if caught in a phantom breeze, the script illegible, twisting before my eyes, shapes and symbols that danced and realigned into words I understood. They watch through the ink, it read. They breathe through the paper. A cold laugh echoed, seeming to come from the book itself, and I stumbled backward, pushing against the weight that held me fast. The flashlight flickered, sputtering terror in shadows and light, illuminating the book one final time. It was then I saw them, eyes, a multitude of them, embedded within the pages, blinking up at me. The flashlight died completely, submerging me in darkness. The last thing I sensed before the panic took hold was the soft rustle of pages turning, as if the book continued to read itself in the absence of light. And perhaps something worse, a tickling sensation over my hands, as if countless tiny feet had begun to skim across my skin. The sound of my own heartbeat was deafening. The sound of my own heartbeat was deafening, a persistent drumming that seemed to echo against the walls of the narrow hallway. Every step forward was a venture into deeper shadows, away from the weak pool of light that the bare bulb in the living room offered. I paused, straining to hear anything beyond the frantic pounding in my ears, but the house remained determinedly silent, as if it were holding its breath along with me. I could still feel the cold spot by the stairs, a clammy hand pressed into the small of my back, urging me to move, to flee. But something about the inherent wrongness of the situation rooted me to the spot. The silence wasn't empty, it was expectant, charged with an unseen malice that seemed almost to hum through the floorboards. With each shallow breath, I could see my exhalations misting in the air before me, circling in a dance of pale ghosts. It was too cold in here, much too cold for a house that had been shut tight against the early autumn chill. The thought of the furnace, dysfunctional and silent below my feet, sparked a new layer of fear. Perhaps it wasn't just broken. Perhaps it had been sabotaged. I continued forward, my hands nearly numb as they brushed along the wallpaper, the floral pattern blooming and wilting beneath my fingertips. Each room I passed was shrouded in darkness, the doorways gaping like open mouths. I could not bring myself to peer inside. The idea of what might stare back was paralyzing. When I reached the end of the hallway, I hesitated in front of the door to the attic. It was slightly ajar, as if someone had been careless in their haste to leave, or as if they were inviting someone in. The softest of drafts seemed to whisper from the gap, carrying a fetid, metallic scent that scratched at the back of my throat. The knob was ice cold under my hand, and I flinched but forced myself to push the door open. The hinges groaned, a slow, agonizing sound that seemed to pull at the edges of my sanity. The beam from my flashlight cut through the blackness, stirring shadows into fleeting, taunting shapes. My breath sounded ragged in the quiet, too loud, as if it were not mine alone. Up here the air was thick, suffused with the odor of mildew and something rotten, like damp earth and decayed flesh. The light revealed old trunks and scattered boxes, forgotten relics shrouded in cobwebs. But at the far end, something didn't belong, a newer box, its edges sharp and clean against the dust. The sight of it sent a ripple of dread through me. It hadn't been there before, I was sure of it. As I approached, the floorboards beneath my feet creaked ominously, whispering secrets long kept silent. My mind raced, every horror story I'd ever heard clawing its way to the forefront of my thoughts. But this was no story. This was real, and it was happening now in the edges of my own life. I reached the box, my hands trembling so that I could barely function the rusty latch. Inside, the contents were initially obscured by the dark, but as my eyes adjusted, I recognized personal items, a picture frame, a child's stuffed animal, a diary. They were mine, items from my childhood room not seen in years, things that should have been lost in countless moves. How they came to be here, collected and locked away, I couldn't fathom. Behind me, the soft sound of shifting sent a shockwave of terror through my body. Spinning around, flashlight flailing wild arcs across the attic, I caught a glimpse of something, some form, slunk back into the shadows. My heart, already a drum, became a sledgehammer against my ribs. Muting the urge to scream, I backed away, my eyes wide, refusing to blink for fear of what might move in my moment of darkness. The retreat was slow, every step an eternity, until my back pressed against the cold, unforgiving wood of the attic door. I had forgotten to keep it open, a fatal error. The thing in the shadows had been real, its presence was palpable, a weight in the air that tasted of old pennies and panic. Without warning, the light flickered, stuttering in a dying surge before it went out completely, plunging me into oppressive darkness. My breath was a white noise rush in my ears, louder than my hammering heart. And in that consuming black, I heard it, a low, mournful creak of floorboards as something moved towards me with deliberate, horrifying patience. My trembling fingers stretched out, desperate for the familiar switch, but instead, they grazed something that felt like cold, knotted wood, a texture that shouldn't exist on the smooth plaster wall. I yanked my hand back, heart thrashing wildly against my ribs, and the air chilled around me, drawing goosebumps up my arms. The creaking grew louder, closer. I could almost feel the weight of each step as it pressed down upon the rotting floor. Each groan of the wood whispered secrets of decay and long-forgotten stories that no living soul was meant to hear. I stood frozen, my back against the wall that had traitorously transformed under my fingertips. From somewhere to my left, a whimper sliced through the thick darkness. My name hitched on a windy breath, so faint it might have been imagined. Evelyn, the voice was not quite human, warped by sorrow or worse. It knew me. The realization sent a tremor through my entire body. I wanted to call out, to demand it present itself, but my tongue lay heavy and useless in my mouth, swollen with fear. The floorboards continued their mournful song as whatever it was edged ever nearer. I could not see, yet I felt its presence enveloping the space around me, a denseness in the air like the pressure before a storm. As my eyes adjusted to the void left by the light, faint outlines and shapes began to swim into existence, a trick of the mind, surely. Shadows within shadows, shifting ever so slightly. My breathing escalated, each exhale a fog in the cool air of the room. A sudden, sharp stop in the progression of creaking floorboards jarred my senses. Silence hung heavy, not even the wind outside dared disturb the quiet. I strained my ears, seeking any sound, a clue, a warning. Nothing. The stillness was complete and utter, unnaturally so. In that hellish quiet, my mind raced over the day's events, retracing footsteps that had led me to this forsaken place. The dusty bookshop, the old, leather-bound volume I'd taken, more out of pity than interest. The strange reluctance of the shopkeeper as he handed it over, his fingers lingering. G on the cover, his eyes clouded with an unspoken dread. "Read it well, mind the edges," he had said, his voice a low, tremulous murmur. I had dismissed his words as the quirky antics of an eccentric old man. Now, as I stood enveloped by darkness so profound, so absolute, I cursed myself for my ignorance, my arrogance. A shuffling sound, like dry leaves dragged across a stone, snapped me out of my reverie. It was directly in front of me now. The air shifted, a whisper against my face. Instinctively, I stepped backwards, my spine rigid against the bizarre, bark-like texture of the wall. Then it touched me. Not a hand, no flesh or bone, but something colder, harder, tendrils that felt like the wind made solid, winding around my wrist. I screamed, a raw, tearing sound that seemed to absorb into the walls, unanswered. Panic surged, and with it, reckless courage or madness. I twisted my arm, pulling against the cold grasp. The grip tightened, undeniable in its intention, pulling me forward, guiding me deeper into the pressing dark. As I stumbled forward, the air grew colder, the atmosphere thicker, almost wet. My foot caught on something soft and malleable below the hard floor. I dared not think what it might be. Suddenly, the oppressive darkness blinked, and for a fleeting second I saw it, a glimpse of something grotesque, a confluence of shadows and despair, its form obscured and shifting, its eyes hollow pits of endless torment. The sight clawed at the edges of my sanity. The light flickered once more, and died just as quickly as it had come, leaving me blind once again in the chilling embrace of the unseen. I remembered the shopkeeper's words, a warning not just about the book, but about the edges of darkness where things better left unread and unseen lurk, waiting. As the grip on my wrist tightened, pulling me inexorably forward into the abyss, a single tear forged a path down my cheek. In that moment, I understood true terror, not of monsters or death, but of the unyielding dark and what lay within, forever waiting.